the worst thing in the world would be to go into a school with a Bob the Builder caricature, for instance, which that's happened. What you're doing is you're stereotyping what building is all about.
So Bob the Builder is out. Where do you stand on the Mario Brothers? I'm joking. You don't even need to dignify that question. Hello and welcome to WSP's Positive Impact podcast. I'm your host, Lucy Siegle, and this series is for anyone with an inquiring mind who sees opportunity in positive change. Yes, if you're in the market for groundbreaking ideas and innovations and want to be part of shaping the future of our cities, industries and environment, you are in the right place. We're also aware, how could we not be, that these are turbulent times, politically, technologically and economically. So this podcast is designed to help you navigate tricky waters and stay focused on dialing up your positive impact. Coming up in this episode, we dive into the world of design and construction. Now, this sector is often perceived as slow to change, but bubbling under the surface are many transformative methods and concepts. Our guest today will talk about some of those and how to unlock greater positive impact. Change is coming and we are determined to be on the right side of it. Are you ready? Let's start by meeting our guests. We have two genuine pioneers in this space. Dale Sinclair, welcome. Head of Digital Innovation at WSP, a pragmatic futurist and thought leader who has been driving change through cutting-edge technologies and innovative workflows. And I'm delighted to say we also have Mark Farmer. Welcome to you, CEO of Cast Consultancy and the author of the landmark report, Modernise or Die. Mark has been a leading advocate for pre-manufactured construction and tackling the labour market challenges facing the industry. So let's dive in, shall we? Mark, let's come to you first. Your report, Modernise or Die, was a wake-up call for the construction industry, but it was almost a decade ago. So we're due a very concise catch-up, and I say concise just because of the time constraints. Where are we now, and what progress, or maybe not, have you seen in that interim decade?
So I think it's fair to say a lot has happened in that intervening 8-9 year period. I think one of the challenges I set out to the industry back in 2016 was that we're going to face increasingly severe labour shortages, and most of that has come to pass. So in terms of where we are at the moment in relation to construction workforce challenges, it's difficult. We have an ageing workforce. We don't have enough young people coming in. So that backdrop that I set out has largely crystallised. But set against that, I challenged the industry to modernise, to think differently about how it does things. I think that message to some extent has landed. And actually there's a growing realisation that businesses have to think differently about how they're going to do things in the future. So despite all of the things that have gone on, including Brexit, including the Ukraine conflict, economic volatility, political volatility, I think it's heartening to see that the industry has attempted to respond, albeit there's constraints out there that have probably held it back from what it could have done if we had a clean break at it.
Yeah, that's interesting because that speaks to the fact that there must be some resilience in the industry. So we'll get back to some of those points. There's a lot to unwrap there. And thank you for doing it so concisely, because a decade in, that time is very well done. Dale, let's come to you. We're obviously in need of some change, fresh, positive impact. So in what ways do you think this can be achieved?
Well, what's really exciting for us just now is that we're having to take the carbon out of our projects, not just the making, but also the use of the buildings that we do. But what we're seeing is the convergence of two themes at the same time. One is this plethora of digital tools coming to market that allow us to change the way that we design, make it much more exciting and faster and better. But also we're moving construction into the factories. So we're starting to make things differently. And those two elements coming together at the same time to resolve that carbon challenge is really, really exciting.
Now, I know that you're keen on this phrase, kit of parts. I too like the sound of it, but I don't really understand what it means. So could you explain that out for me a little bit?
Yeah, so every building that we do is fundamentally put together by taking thousands of really small things to site and then putting them together, which is why every building is unique. But what we're seeing is this trend to try to make bigger pieces, which allow us to make things in the factories. But then when we bring those bigger pieces to site, we can do things much faster. So we can build buildings faster. And of course, when we make things in factories, we drive a huge amount of waste out the process. So all of these different things come together. So for us, a kit of parts is the actual pieces of the new way of making buildings, but it's also a mindset and a philosophy for how we design buildings differently and try and drive change in the industry.
Where do you see the main applications of kit of parts?
Right now, our main application of kit of parts has been at Manchester Airport, where we're just finishing 8 of the nodes. And it's been absolutely fascinating working out how to reduce the number of parts that we take to the site. So on that project, we may have traditionally had something like 5,000 components coming to site, and we've reduced that down to 67 sub-assemblies. So rather than taking 6 months to construct, we're now putting these buildings up in weeks. Airports are really challenging from health and safety perspective, and of course, you're working in a live kind of building environment. So the less that we can touch that, the easier it is for everyone.
When you put it like that, it sounds so compelling that I'm wondering why everybody doesn't commission buildings in that way. Do you need to be a certain size of organisation? Do you need to have certain things in place to be able to look at that model at the moment?
I don't think so. I think for me, it's just a mindset change. Everyone just has to believe that we can do it. It is tough. It's not for the faint-hearted, I must admit. But it's certainly when we start to see the outcomes, and certainly in that project, everyone's now really excited that we've been through all the pain points, if you like, and the learning points, and we're all really kind of geared up to take this to our next project, where thankfully it'll be much easier to do, and we'll get even better outcomes the next time.
Yes, clearly, and super interesting. As you will learn from listening to this podcast, I love a phrase. So kit of parts is my phrase of the day. Okay, I'm moving on to sort of more philosophical kind of landscape now. Is it simply that, in a sense, the construction industry is just very attached, possibly too attached to traditional materials and methods, and that's kind of limiting, both mindset and practice? Dale, what do you think?
I don't think it's a case of being attached. It's more the fact that the whole ecosystem of construction is built up over thousands and thousands of years. We've been making places to be safe and secure for a long time. And I think one of the complexities is the way that we've evolved over those centuries of time. Is really fragmented. So we go from really small one-man band companies right through to the biggest international conglomerates, but how those different entities are put together is very different. So we need new procurement processes that sit alongside the new designing and making pieces that I'm talking about, and that's difficult when everyone's got different ideas and everyone's doing different things. But it is very challenging because of that fragmentation.
You're talking about a sort of paradigm shift, aren't you, really?
Yeah.
I know you're a very learned individual. I know you read a lot, and you've actually done us a great reading list, which is great. Where do you kind of suggest that people start with this mission?
It's a good point. I think for me, I like being in the eye of the storm, and I like thinking about the things which will drive the biggest change. So I think trying to look at how we can reuse components, because we're really bad at finishing one project and we then all go into our next project and we get right back to the blank piece of paper. So I think the reuse of elements and that ability to almost design buildings more like a Lego kit would come together are some of the thoughts that we're having around how we make the process much more efficient.
Well, certainly a lot of us are very familiar with Lego, so that should work on some level. Mark, do you think there's a sort of issue that most of the time when people conceptualise or think of a building, they automatically think of bricks and mortar? Does that sort of elemental thinking have to change?
From a UK perspective, I think we do have this affinity with masonry as a vernacular. from a planning perspective, from a aesthetic perspective, I think there's a fixation with it. It's just part of the sort of built environment heritage, if you like, of the country. But it does have implications. It has implications that perhaps inhibit our ability to modernise and to innovate in a way that perhaps we could if we didn't have that linkage to certain traditional materials. It's not a showstopper. And I think, part of the thing to understand is there's an opportunity to think about how we replicate that look and feel of traditional masonry construction through using innovative pre-manufacturing. It can be done. Ultimately, the acid test is going to be, what does it look like? What does it feel like? And if you can get to a point where a consumer, whether it's someone buying a home or, a commercial tenant in the building, can look at a building, can touch it and feel as though it's traditional, then actually you've managed to answer the exam questions in many respects.
Yeah. And what about like a different demography? Because if you talked to or aimed at something at Gen Zers, for example, they might not feel quite so attached to masonry. They might not have a masonry fixation, as you put it so memorably.
Yeah, there's definitely a generational opportunity here. So I think the propensity to accept something different, to accept contemporary approaches to design and ways of living is very much going to be driven by the younger generations coming through. So I think that's an opportunity. Mm-hmm. I think that the only thing I would say is institutionally, things like planning, some of those things that are set in legislation, that they have to move on as well.
Yes.
So that's beyond generational thinking. That's about policy. That's about governments thinking about how you enable innovation in a broader institutional context as well.
Mm-hmm. Vibe shift coming, maybe. I learned that phrase recently. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about resilience and change overall. One of the missions of this podcast is to help our audience navigate what we might call an overload of change and all the turbulence in the world. How can the construction industry find the resilience to embrace all the innovation that you tell us is waiting, that we're starting to hear about? And is anybody doing it and doing it well? Mark, let's come back to you.
So I think this point about resilience is really important, because actually the industry has proven itself to be resilient, and it's done that primarily through how it's structured itself. So it's become risk averse. So part of resiliency is avoiding, the danger of having too many fixed costs. So part of that has driven our move towards subcontracting, for instance. So what we need to think about is, how do we improve resiliency through doing things differently, as opposed to just organising ourselves in a different way where we're just devolving risk down the supply chain, for instance, as subcontracting and getting someone else to hold the risk. How do businesses hold risk better? And that implicitly for me is about how we do things differently, how we modernise, how we improve productivity, how we use digital tools to augment the professional skills that we have. And we have some unique world-leading professional skills in our industry that through use of digital, through innovative techniques in how we design, how we procure, how we manufacture and how we build on site, I think implicitly we're going to make ourselves a more resilient industry for the future.
Very good. And I think I know the answer to this, but is it helpful to call it an industry and to think of it in that monolithic sense? Yeah,
it's a good challenge. I think it's something easy to slip into in terms of thinking of construction as a homogenous entity, and it's not. It's a hugely fragmented sector, as we've already said. Made up of tens of thousands of different businesses, both in contracting firms, but in professional services firms, material suppliers. So ultimately what this comes down to, that challenge around how we make ourselves more resilient, is going to be have to be taken on by businesses and by the leaders of those businesses. It's all about leadership. And there's going to be some businesses that go in that direction. There's going to be others that don't. It's not as though the whole industry is going to move in a certain direction. It's going to be about where we can get a consensus and a direction of travel, where those businesses that can see that the future is all about innovating and modernising, that's the direction they set sail in.
Yes, thank you. A very realistic overview as well. Dale, how do you think that we should approach innovation?
One of the challenges just now is designing buildings has become much more complex. So trying to remove that complexity is really crucial part of what we're trying to do. And I always remember when I read The Future of the Professions by Richard and Daniel Susskind, the phrase that always resonated with me was that we are the generation that got the tough gig. We're the generation that are having to deal with that complexity. But they said this 4 or 5 years ago, that AI and other tools would come along that would make things simpler again. So I'm really excited that in about 10, 15 years' time, things will become normal. Well, we'll get this new steady state, if you like. So I do genuinely believe that will happen, and that will be the paradigm shift. So I think for the next generations coming into our construction industry, I think it's really exciting that hopefully that we get rid of that complexity, makes us more resilient. Then, of course, what we're able to do then is focus on the challenges of the future, which will be continuing to take the carbon out of our buildings, making them better to live in, and so on and so forth.
Change is coming in 10 or 15 years' time. Hold on, everybody.
Yeah.
I told you he was well read. Okay, so are there any examples of, a wholesale change that everyone is kind of familiar with, a way of doing things now, which we didn't have in the recent past?
I suppose the biggest piece is that shift to manufacturing, and there's lots of companies, there's lots of small companies. So we like Facet Homes, for example. They're an end-to-end. They're making they're one-off buildings differently. They're trying to move into other sectors. We're seeing the likes of Red 10. They're doing volumetric elements in some sectors. So we're seeing lots of vertical integration, and we do see contracting models changing in the future as we begin to shift the effort from site into the factories. So maybe the contractors of the future become more assemblers rather than traditional contractors. So the bones of all of these things are there, but we don't see any one specific route really coming to the market at this point in time.
Talk to me, if you will, Dale, a little bit about IKEA, because I've heard you mention this as an example before, and I think it's a really, really good one that we can all relate to.
Yeah, so any of us can go to IKEA's website right now and design our own kitchen. We can then play around, we can view it all in 3D, and then we can instantly order that and be picking that up, maybe not tonight, but maybe tomorrow. But we could certainly by the end of this weekend have designed our own kitchen and have installed that in our own house. What we'd like to see is buildings being able to be procured along the same line. So wouldn't it be great if we could have the stairs of a hospital or the toilet pods of an airport that could be done in the same way as IKEA, so that we could configure them and have those already for fabrication. So that whole idea of configurators and catalogs we find quite exciting around that IKEA model.
I love that example. I sort of tempted to add other brands are available, but they're not really in the same way, which is part of the kind of glory of the example. Okay, another thing that I think we have to do, and obviously, Mark, you talked about this right at the start in relation to the landmark report that you wrote. We have to confront the elephant in the room, and this is a big elephant, the skills gap. We know there are fewer young people entering construction, so what do we do?
So I think there's a big piece of work that is needed around the imaging of the industry, if that's the right word. So what's the shop window that we present to the public? Actually, it starts with just the general public, but more particularly the young talent that we want to come into our industry in the future. So that's school-age kids who are thinking about career choices, and actually way beyond that. In probably, at junior school level, we're talking about really starting to engage a new narrative. And I think to date, we've shot ourselves in the foot somewhat. I think if you look back the last 20, 30 years, some of the techniques used to engage kids have been perpetuating some of the problems we have. So, the worst thing in the world would be to go into a school with a Bob the Builder caricature, for instance, which that's happened, and was, with a builder with a tool belt and a high vis and a hard hat. Some people would think that's the right thing to do, but actually what you're doing is you're stereotyping what building is all about. I think we need to really open it up to what built environment construction is becoming, which is a technology-enabled advanced manufacturing sector. If we can get this right, then that's the way we need to talk. We need to think about link it to the projects that we work on as well, the infrastructure that we create for the country, the housing that we create for the country wouldn't be able to operate. The economy would not be able to operate unless we had a fit for purpose construction sector. And I think that narrative that we create for young kids is really important. I think we just need to be clever at how we do that.
So Bob the Builder is out. Where do you stand on the Mario Brothers? I'm joking. You don't even need to dignify that question. Dale, there's a big shift, isn't there, away from the way that construction used to be done.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, what's great for me is a couple of times this year I've been speaking at conferences, and I've been on after the Star Wars team, so the production company making some of the Star Wars movies. And of course, I'm thinking, wow, this is a tough gig, trying to speak after those sort of guys. But that's how fantastic our industry is now. We're using visualization tools. We're using software that is used in those industries. And actually, we're creating a buzz of excitement about changing that whole design process and, of course, the making process. So I think we are actually making the industry much more exciting. And I think when we come away from those sort of sessions and we can create that same buzz as a Star Wars movie, I think that's incredibly great starting point to look towards an industry that is much more exciting for the next generation of professionals.
Well, that's quite something. It's out with Bob the Builder and in with Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's the message. Thank you. Yeah. What sort of evolution then do we see of the work site itself? How does that begin to change, Dale?
The trend that we're seeing is as we begin to move effort from the construction site to the factory, what we've realised is that we can position the factories anywhere in the country or even anywhere in the world. And we like this idea of manufacturing providing a lot of social value. We can put the factories into communities. We can start to look at the micro factories that the World Economic Forum have already said they see as a massive enabler into the future. So that ability for workers to cycle to work rather than be traveling hundreds of miles to different construction sites, I think is really important for how we can not just drive the change of construction, but drive better communities and more local manufacturing models.
Wow. So you kind of get these kind of hubs, these localized production. Does that sit, Mark, with the way that people want to work in this industry now?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting trends that have been observed, particularly in relation to how itinerant the construction workforce is. So historically, it's always been reliant on migrant workers and actually quite a lot of workers travelling quite extensively to sites. That has reduced over the last certainly 20 years. What that leads to is an opportunity to think differently about the mix of what is done remotely, what is done locally, and actually what those jobs are that are done locally. So in terms of creating social value, you want to be able to tap into local workforces, but the distribution of the type of jobs that are delivered on site might be different because you might be assembling rather than doing traditional craft work. So, and that plays to the sort of the other agenda around workers wanting better working conditions. They want less physical work, less exertion, less exposure to the elements. So there's quite a few opportunities that can come around from thinking differently about how we build on sites.
Yeah, clearly. Okay, you've both been very compelling so far, but I really would like to know, is this going to scale? Really, is it scalable? And what is the missing piece in bringing these solutions to scale? Dale, let's start with you.
It's definitely scalable because what we can begin to see is that a shift away that every building is designed as a one-off. And I've been doing projects for my whole career, and I just really beginning to get excited about this notion that we do programs of work or even scale programs between clients. So because we know we design these from scratch every time. We look at the connections differently. We look at the balustrading. If we could all come together to create this new catalogue of components for buildings, then we can scale the manufacturing. We can make buildings much better to experience. And I don't think that impedes the design process at all. In fact, it's well known that good design comes from having a clear set of constraints. So all aspects of what we see point to a very different industry, but one that's much more efficient. We can design projects faster and more efficiently, but we can make them more efficiently. And of course, in use, those buildings will use less carbon and be much more efficient for the environment.
So there's big environmental wins in that approach. Mark, how do we sort of crack the cost? Because that is a factor, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points here. One is in relation to just industrialization generally and changing the way we build. I think there's a nervousness that it means it's going to be more expensive. The theory is that it's cheaper because actually if you're doing things over and over again, you're achieving economies of scale, which is the manufacturing model. But in that sort of intervening period, there is potentially a price premium that you need to overcome. And that is all about achieving scale, which in turn is about trying to convince clients, and it's usually clients that have to lead this debate and their advisors giving them the right advice. That journey is based on a benefits case of something that's better quality, it's quicker, there's more cost certainty. Ultimately, the cost level will reduce as well. So I think part of this is proof points, part of it is evidence, part of it is just pointing to where this has been done and actually you've got a better outcome. And when you do that, it's a bit of a floodgates opportunity because actually everyone will look at that and think, I want some of that. So that's definitely part of it. From the environmental perspective, where we're looking at innovating new materials, we're looking at decarbonising the process. That's partly down to government setting the regulatory framework correctly so that we have the backdrop of knowing what the regulations are, but it's also going to be down to investment houses saying that that's what they require under their ESG rules and their investment guidelines. So there's a whole series of sort of carrot and stick forces that are going to be at play here, but ultimately this is definitely scalable. It's just finding those catalysts for change.
And do you think there is an appetite or a growing appetite or a decreasing appetite for embedding net zero and environmental factors?
Yeah, I think that as an industry, we have an increased self-awareness of how important we are in terms of our contribution to global emissions. I think that's at an individual level, but also a corporate level, definitely. And I just think there's more and more interest in understanding how we're going to crack it. And I think as long as that is high in the public consciousness, then it's going to be high on the industry's consciousness as well.
I hope so. I don't want to push my luck here, but I do want to just add on something about circular economy as well. Dale, you've kind of touched on this, but we've talked about designing for manufacturing and assembly, but what about disassembly? Because reusing and recirculating is obviously key to sustainability.
Absolutely. What's really good about designing buildings to be made in the factory is that we're automatically or inherently making them be able to be disassembled. So the big trend for us we see is around trying to make buildings last longer, to make them be adaptable. So just now we demolish buildings after, say, 60 years. So we want buildings to last much longer. We want to, for example, adapt the home of a hospital so that maybe it becomes a hotel. So I think the adaptation process and that ability to adapt is great. And then, of course, we need to use things like material passports to understand how where did the materials in this building come from? What's their legacy? And all those things that we can't currently do. The Haynes manual, I'm sure you'll like that term, that we used to have for our cars. It's have each building have its own way of understanding where did all the components come from and how do I replace those easily. And I guess the ultimate point would be that if our generation do our job properly, maybe we never demolish buildings ever again. We're just perpetually adapting buildings into the future.
We haven't just retired Bob the Builder, but we've actually changed his name. Bob the Adapter is coming.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, we have whizzed through a whole kind of landscape of topics here. And I think as a reward, I'm going to give you the power to change just one thing, but nevertheless, the power to change something that will create a positive impact in the construction industry. What would it be and why? You use this wish very carefully. Mark, let's come to you first.
Well, so I suppose if there's one thing that, as a utopian sort of wish list, if you like, it would be the ability to give the industry a much more stable workload in the long term. Because if there's so many of the things that we need to do as an industry, and many of which we've spoken about today, that are about confidence in the future, are about investment in innovation, technology, people, skills and training. And so much of that will be unlocked by businesses and leaders of businesses looking ahead and knowing that the workload and the demand profile in front of it, whether it's housing, whether it's infrastructure, commercial construction, isn't going to oscillate and go up and down like a fiddler's elbow. Actually, there's some element of trend to it. If you could do that, I think it would have disproportionate benefit to the industry.
Very well said. Have you any thoughts on how that could be done?
Well, it's a utopia. Clearly, one of the big solutions there is the role of government, because actually so much of this is about long-term thinking about infrastructure. So there's been talk about 10-year infrastructure plans, for instance, which is tricky because, you know, you're talking about multiple parliamentary cycles, and politics is about 5-year blocks. So our industry doesn't work well when you're trying to change it in 5-year blocks. You have to think about decade beyond. So there's definitely a need for cross-party consensus politically to think about what infrastructure projects we're going to do and stick to those commitments. What's our housing policy? How much private versus social housing are we going to build, and how are we going to build it year on year rather than going up and down like we have done historically? And I think if you solve some of those issues around the policy backdrop, and ultimately you're never going to fix in the economy because that's subject to too many global variants, but I think you can at least smooth some of the ups and downs we have.
Yeah, very good point. Dale, if you had the power to change one thing, what are you going to pick?
Well, like I said before, we've been designing buildings for construction for a long time, and I'm super excited that we're trying to change to move towards what we call design for manufacture and assembly. But it's a very different process, and we do enjoy speaking to clients about the possibility that we could design a building this week and have that building being constructed on a site next week. So when we can do things really fast, for us, my one wish, I guess, would be, could we please get the procurement and planning processes that would allow us to actually deliver on that? Because we can do it today. Technologically, we can do it. From a design perspective, we can do it. So we just need those new ways of delivering projects and of course, some of the political side of that to sit behind that so that we can get to a position where we can be designing this week and making next week.
Thank you both so much. You heard it. We've got it all ready to go. Okay, that is all we have time for, I'm afraid to say, on this episode of WSP's Positive Impact podcast. A huge thank you to our guests, Dale Sinclair and Mark Farmer, for all of their insight. Yes, I am persuaded. Are you? Let us know what you think. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast. And of course, please rate and review us on your favourite podcast app. Now, for more on today's topics, check out the additional resources and reading materials linked in the episode description. Thanks for listening, and join us next time as we continue exploring the ideas and innovations shaping our world. Until then, I'm Lucy Siegle, and this is WSP's Positive Impact Podcast.